Hello guys, welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to see about the necrosis. So before going into detail about the necrosis, we have to know which are all the ways by which cell injury takes place. So cell injury, it takes place mainly by two ways. That is, one by apoptosis and the other by necrosis. So now let us first see the definitions of apoptosis and necrosis. So what is the definition of apoptosis? Apoptosis refers to series of death of cells that takes place in a controlled manner, which is required for the harmonial growth of an organism. So now what is meant by necrosis? Necrosis is nothing but the series of morphological changes that takes place in a lethally injured cell. So from these definitions itself, we can easily infer that necrosis is always pathological, and apoptosis, it may be pathological or it may be physiological. So what happens in apoptosis? Only one or small group of cells are affected. That is, only a small group or a single cell just undergoes apoptosis. Whereas in a necrosis, mass of cells get affected. So now coming to the topic necrosis proper. In necrosis, the cell gets irreversibly injured. So what happens? When a cell gets injured, many changes takes place within the cell. And finally, it leads to the death of the cell. So these series of changes which takes place in a necrosed cell, that is called as necrosis. Okay, now let us take a look at what are all the changes that takes place while a cell is undergoing necrosis, right? The first change is intracellular protein denaturation. So what happens in this? When a cell undergoes a lethal injury, all the proteins within the cell, that is the intracellular protein, undergo denaturation. This leads to the structural and functional changes in the cell. How this leads to structural and functional changes? So what happens when the structural proteins undergo denaturation? What are all the structural proteins? Those which help in the formation of the cell membrane. Those are all the structural proteins. When they undergo denaturation, they lead to the structural changes of the cell. So when the functional proteins, like the enzymes, when they undergo denaturation, they lead to the functional changes of the cell. So both these structural and functional changes, they lead to the morphological change of a cell.